Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce, Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We're going to, I suppose, a theme for the beginning part of this video is going to be daring attempts and stories of, I guess, heroism. We're going to start with the rigs off of Crimea, Cape and Kut, and to the west of that, in the Black Sea, in the northern part of the northwestern Black Sea. Now, here, Euromaidan Press reports on a Ukrainian commander revealing how Ukraine liberated gas rigs in the Black Sea and landed in occupied Crimea. So on Ukraine's Independence Day, 24th of August, so this was, it was tied very pertinently to Independence Day. Ukrainian soldiers conducted an audacious operation by briefly landing in occupied Crimea and raising the Ukrainian flag. In September, Ukraine launched another bold operation to gain control of 4 gas rigs off the coast known as the Boyko Towers, depriving Russia of surveillance over the Black Sea. Ukrainian commander, using the pseudonym Timur, shared details of these daring missions. So Russia seized control of the Boyko Towers in 2015, shortly after its illegal annexation of Crimea. The operation to regain control over the rigs was planned for about 2 weeks. One of the operation's participants, a commander of the special unit with the main intelligence director of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, known as Timur, told Liga.net he mentioned that the biggest challenge for his team was the open seas. Now, just before I go on, it's worth noting that Russia took control of these in 2015, like Ukrainian infrastructural, entities, concerns, part of the energy infrastructure, and not only did they take Crimea, they just took the rigs as well. Like, fairly obvious what Russia were doing, and that was an invasion then, effectively. Of course it was. Quote, my unit had experience in river sabotage actions. Snake Island, Boyko Towers, and landing of Crimea are maritime operations. It's a different feeling, a different adrenaline, the officer explained. Russians manned all the gas platforms, but when Ukrainian special forces approached to retake the rigs, the Russian troops offered little resistance. According to Timur, his unit utilized more than just inflatable boats to reach the platforms, contrary to some media reports at the time. A Russian fighter jet also participated in the battle. The clash involving the Russian aircraft did occur, but later. The fighting against the Russian fighter jet took place at a stage when we were heading to the next mission after the gas rigs, the Ukrainian commander said. Timur's special unit also took part in a landing in occupied Crimea on Ukraine's Independence Day. A battle took place at Cape and Kut, involving watercraft and aviation. Quote, the commanders aimed to raise our flag in Crimea on Independence Day. Citizens under occupation recognized our homecoming across kilometers of sea. We demonstrated solidarity with them, just as they showed theirs with us. Without public support, this would have been impossible, it said Timur. Ukrainian troops approached a building where Russian soldiers had a patrol vehicle was staying. The Ukrainians launched grenades, prompting the Russian personnel to flee the area. The Ukrainians then raised their national flag in the scene. According to the Ukrainian commander, many troops were eager to participate in the mission, but there was limited space on the boats used. The commander stated that his forces intend to return to Crimea in the future. Russia hijacked the gas drilling rigs B-312 Petro Hodovanets and B-319 Ukraina off the coast of Crimea in the Black Sea back in 2015 after it invaded and occupied the Crimean Peninsula. According to Ukrainian intelligence, since 2022, Russia has been using the platforms as helicopter landing sites and for deploying radar equipment, exerting control over the Black Sea. Ukraine retook control of the gas platforms on the 11th of September. Now, there was also a story of someone being in the water in one of these kind of raids where the Russian aviation got involved, and someone went overboard and was in the water for 14 hours before himself being rescued. That is a pretty incredible story in and of itself. Then we heard the other day of a rescue mission behind enemy lines. This one, 2 Ukrainian paratroopers hid for a year and a half in Russian-controlled territory. Quote, every life is important. The Navy and the GUR conducted a successful operation and returned home 2 Ukrainian paratroopers. A few weeks ago, the Navy Intelligence Department received information from operational sources that 2 servicemen of the Ukrainian armed forces have been in temporarily occupied territory since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, where they participated in battles with the occupiers, were seriously injured, and were unable to independently enter the territory controlled by Ukraine. At this time, they were in an illegal situation and successfully hid. thanks to local residents. An evacuation plan was prepared, the implementation of which also involved the command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine Armed Forces, whose units provided fire cover during the exit of the group. Thanks to the joint efforts of two servicemen who had been in the occupied territory for more than a year and a half, it was possible to bring them to the territory controlled by the Ukraine the other day. So obviously there's a lack of detail there because of, you need to keep quiet who was involved, where it was. You don't want to get locals in trouble, so on and so forth. But you can imagine that this would probably involve quite an incredible story. Now I'm going to drop into John Spencer, who's an urban warfare specialist. They often have on Ukraine the Latest podcast talking about an incredible story concerning someone escaping from Mariupol. So over to him.
Now, in terms of hope, you recently met and interviewed and wrote up the story of an amazing man and his story of survival. And from what little I know, having read it and briefly chatted to you, I don't think he would have got through it if he didn't keep hope somewhere in his soul throughout all of that. Can you talk us through it in the detail you're able to? Just tell us that story and introduce this guy, because this is absolutely fascinating.
So on my last trip to Kyiv, I met with a guy, because I'm studying the Battle of Mariupol, so I was introduced to this guy named Gina, who was, I liken him to Rambo, but he's more like a Jason Bourne and a Rambo combination, where he had served in the Ukrainian army, he had been a paratrooper, he had served in the Marines in Mariupol, because he grew up there. And then he had gotten out and was in some special police services and other organizations and happened to be living in Mariupol when the full-scale invasion started. It's like you have this guy in your community who then says, right, they've invaded. They're coming for my city. He takes up arms at the beginning of the war and fights with a group of veterans, which I think is what Red Dawn for us got wrong, is that the veterans that you think are going to stand up. But he stood up, fought the Russians in Mariupol. His little group gets cut down to two. The two of them try to make a run towards the Azovstal steel factory, which is really big in the story of Mariupol. He gets blown up. He gets captured. He gets tortured and captured in Mariupol for weeks.
So he didn't make it into the steel plant in that defense. So
yeah.
He was captured before that happened.
Yeah, he knew as a citizen of Mariupol that would be a last stand. And he had gotten enough communication to know that there were people there. And it was almost like this hope of, he always wanted to get to the steel factory. And throughout his journey, there's so many times where he's like, okay, we just got to get to the factory. So when there's only two of them left, they hotwire a car and try to get to the factory. It gets blown up by a landmine, which knocks him unconscious and starts his injuries. When he gets captured, it's...
And isn't it funny how... Not funny, ha. I think it's incredible that the Mariupol steel factory siege and that entire event that took place seems so long ago now. It's almost like a different time. Just that was such a big thing, and yet I guess when you look at this war on a daily basis under the magnifying glass that we do, you can sometimes lose sight of that which has happened previously that's been part of this. I mean, I was watching that under the same magnifying glass then as I'm watching things like Bakhmut and Robotina now. Yet so much has happened that you forget. I mean, maybe you don't, but I'm victim. I mean, my memory's pretty short anyway, but I'm victim to forgetting this. And then, it's such a massive part of the story of this conflict. Anyway,
almost like what we have as these schools for survival and evasion and resistance, and in his story, that's what he's doing because he's who he is. And at one point, when the steel factory fight is going on, all his Russian captors are called away from him and sent to the factory. So he's left in this basement, tied up, and he literally chews his bandages off, falls out of a second-story building to escape his torture. There's a brief episode where two people see him, grab him, and try to take him back into the house. So it's like a movie that's actually real life in this story, and why I was sort of motivated to write it. Right, so he gets away from his captors. He makes it back to his own apartment building complex where he's He goes into the basement where all the civilians are, and he basically passes out and is hiding out. Where this bloke comes in and says, my family's burning in our house. I need help. And nobody stands up. So Gina, already wounded, says, I'll help. Helps this guy with his pregnant wife and his 2 daughters escape this burning building. Gets them to safety and then goes back into his basement with other civilians. He wakes up with a Russian soldier with a gun in his face.
Right.
Because he had taken off his shirt after saving his children, and he has tattoos that are military related. Well, the guy whose family he saved reported him to the Russian military.
Why did he do that? What possible motivation?
That's insane. You go out your way to do that and get reported.
Don't know.
Yeah. So he's captured a second time.
Yeah. And he escapes, and I'm trying to tell this story as fast as possible. That it's just so unbelievable. He escapes again, and this time he is so wounded from all this torture, basically, that he knows he can't make it to the factory. But he's heard that on the other side of the river that separates Mariupol, that there are less patrols. So he makes his way over there, and he basically enters a life of sheer survival, living in the basements of Mariupol. And in a basement he finds and he improves, and there's lots in there about just mental ability. And he actually talks about that he couldn't let too much hope into his mind because days turn into weeks. He starts eating anything he can, pigeons, animals. He's low crawling at night because he would go out in the day because he can't walk anymore. He's low crawling on his belly to a landfill to try to find food. And he does that for almost 9 months total.
What? And there are so few Russians on that side of the river that he's able to have this kind of nighttime existence,
right,
scavenging for food.
Right, which will really impact you if you're a survivalist. You think about, okay, and someone's in there about how he's filtering his water because like this guy is like this elite soldier who's like our John Rambo story. He's filtering his water in bottles. He can't cook fires to boil water because that smoke would maybe somebody would come find him because he's deathly scared of being captured and tortured again. So he's doing that to survive. And he talks about not letting hope. So he basically enters a mode of where he just survives one day at a time. Like he just has to make it through the day, which is, we talk about in the military, is a way, right? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? But I can't put myself in Gina's shoes. I'm sure I wouldn't have been able to do what he did. Well, just like a movie story, one day a Ukrainian girl shows up on the horizon, just staring at Gina in this, what had to be a sad state. And she would just look at him for a long time. And then one day where she would stand, there was basically a pile of food, a small portion of food. So this Ukrainian girl was delivering him food eventually. And then weeks later, one day, there's a phone, a Russian phone. So Gina takes this phone back to his hideout and just stares at it for hours, not knowing what to do with it. Plus, she turned it on, and at this point, Russians have Mariupol. We're months into occupation. So there's a Russian cell network. It's a Russian chip. And he had no idea what to do with it. So he gets on the phone, actually, which is interesting for us, all the Twitter space and all that, and gets on Instagram and looks through his Instagram because he didn't have a hard password, he said. So he got on Instagram and tried to find somebody he would trust enough or somebody that would believe enough of his story. And he finds an old mate that he had served with in the Marines, and he tells him what's...
I just love the fact that John Spencer here, an American, is saying bloke and mate. He knows his audience, right?
happening, like he's in this survival mode behind enemy lines. And most of his friends, like us, like dark humor, is like, dude, you're screwed. And literally that's what they tell him. And he laughs to me about it when I was interviewing him, but he feels so bad. He's like, yeah, he's like, and I'm like, just turn yourself in and maybe we can exchange you for somebody. He's not a soldier. He's like, there's nobody to exchange for. He's not a soldier. He hadn't been a soldier for a long time, and he was, again, deathly scared, and who wouldn't be, what he'd already been through. And then one day he's back on the phone and they introduced him to somebody in the Navy. They're like, hey, we hear you're a good Marine. And this is the part he wouldn't tell me about because it's classified, but they do some type of Navy SEAL for us or SAS related operation. And they pulled Gina out of Mariupol 9 months into its occupation.
Wow.
And he was sitting in a cafe in Kyiv with me. telling me not only in a very humble way about his story, which I'm just shocked by it because it's just this epic story of the will to live and to survive. But all he wanted us to do is to medically get better so he can go back to fighting and achieving victory for Ukraine.
Insane. I mean, the number one thing for this guy after going through all of that is to think maybe he's become sort of institutionalized in some kind of way that's all that he can think. I've talked about this before, how people that have gone to volunteer or fight or whatever and end up getting sucked into this world, it becomes your world, and then when you take yourself out of it, you just can't function. You don't know, you've got no kind of purpose, or psychologically you're just unable to do so. So you end up, going back in because that's what you know how to operate in that world.
So he's in Kyiv with most of his teeth were knocked out, so doing a lot of reconstruction, and he's training soldiers in Kyiv. But one, I was so motivated by the story was because there have been other stories of this type of superhuman survival in World War II in the Pacific and other places, but I hadn't heard a modern one. But also is that his story hasn't made it out of Ukraine. There's one long-form Ukraine video in person of him, and people know about him. But I was really passionate when I got back after my last trip of getting it out. And I mean, this is a Steven Spielberg movie, a book, just an epic story of the things that we talk about: hope, will to live, all of this. And to me, the struggle of the Ukrainians, you're not going to subjugate them. And I think this is where, on a broader scale, that Putin has to realize is you're not going to outsuffer the Ukrainians.
And did he talk about his motivation? What kept him going? What was it that will to live, that will to survive? Where did it come from?
It had to come from something eternal. We briefly mentioned it. He just said that, he actually says, and I wrote it in there because I tried to quote him as much as possible, that you can't let hope seep in.
You can't let it seep in?
Yeah.
Wow.
So at one point he realizes that there is no hope.
And this is on the back of Dom Nichols previously talking about the importance of hope. And this story kind of turns it on its head, where, hope does play a part, but at certain points in this story, the guy just can't let hope in because it might sort of kind of torture you, to use maybe an inept analogy there.
So he goes into this weird mental mode of just surviving one day at a time. And actually, when he was staring at the phone, I quote him on this too. He's staring at the phone and says, "Okay, here's my alternative." When basically the special forces reached back out to him, like, "Look, we have a plan to get you out, and there's a 1% chance it'll work." And they told him that. So they left it to him. Do you want to take a 1% chance to escape? So he makes a decision. Do I want to continue to live in this animal state, or do I want to take a 1% chance to live in the way he words it? I don't know. It's a very clearly a part of who he is to just not be able to quit. And that's something I learned when I was in nothing like that, but in bad spots, is that you don't have to imagine winning or imagine something else, but that ability to, no matter what's going to happen, I'm not going to quit, is something that I've heard from Navy SEALs that have gone through their intensive training, everything like that. The first step is just taking that ability out of yourself. Like, there is no quit. Like, either you die doing it or you just keep doing it. And I think that was something from all his military and other training. It's just something inside that guy. And when you talk to him, you can tell he's something different.
We spoke about this and about the courses that we have.
So, pretty incredible story. And I guess you're going to hear a lot of these sorts of stories after this war is over, and during it, as you can see here. Pretty incredible stuff there. Right, we're going to go to a Thomas Tyner thread now. I'm in Warsaw, he said the other day, and was quite busy the last 2 weeks with the preparation for and then networking at the Heart of Europe International TV Festival. So I only find time to work through 2 Ukraine realignment papers. So many new weapons for Ukraine. Right, so let's begin with the coolest stuff. There is a classified, he says, classified Army emergency missile procurement for $187.4 million, which seems isn't GIMLRS, so it's not guided multiple launch rocket system, HIMARS kind of stuff, as that is under another classified section. $71.3 million of GIMLRs are being acquired. So if it isn't GIMLRs, what could it be? Let's say, stay with missiles, $389.9 million for Javelins, $148.5 million for Javelins for Ukraine. So this isn't all for Ukraine, this is just like procurement for the US Army. And the rest to replace USMC, so US Marine Corps, TOW, that's optical wired, the ones shot off the top of a Bradley, a 2A and 2B missiles delivered with the Bradleys. Speaking of Bradleys, $681.6 million for the new 2A4, M2A4 Bradleys, to free up additional M2A2 ODS and M113 for Ukraine. And also $61.9 million Bradley era ERA, so that's explosive reactive armor tiles to improve the armor of Ukraine's Bradleys, and $9.8 million for spare parts. Also $215.7 million for 25 by 137 millimeter ammo for the Bradley's gun. This order doubles US 25mm ammo production for 2023. Let's stay with ammo, as there is one amazing round on the way to Ukraine. Ammo, $146.3 million for small arms ammo, $28.5 for explosive dual-purpose grenades, $29.2 for M67 fragmentation, M18 coloured smoke, and M106 obscurant grenades, $12.9 for a variety of USMC grenades, and $12.7 for M112 and other demolition munitions, including 40-pound cratering demolition charges. But the most amazing ammo on the way to Ukraine are a whopping $134.5 million in M1147 rounds for Abrams tanks. The M1147 is the US Army's most modern round and specifically designed to ruthlessly butcher enemy infantry in trenches. And you can see it in this. I've shown you this very video before, actually, probably on a Thomas Tyner thread. This is, as you can see, it explodes, and it's kind of like a cluster munition in a sense, and it just absolutely spreads out fragmentation that would properly cause issues for infantry. So this is an anti-infantry munition on board an Abrams. Ukraine is also receiving M4A1 carbines, M240B machine guns, M2HB machine guns, M2A1 machine guns, 40mm at Mark 19 machine gun grenade launchers, and M249 machine guns for $30.2 million, and $5.1 million in night vision viewers and weapon night sights, as well as $16.5 million for thermal sights. Okay, so before I come to a huge air defense surprise, a look at artillery ammo. So 72.2, I'm going to be talking in numbers in terms of $1 million. 72.2 for charges, fuses, primers, 357.4 for M795 155mm rounds, 59.5 for Excalibur rounds, 19.2 for 60mm, 81mm and 120mm mortar rounds, 13.4 million for M326A1 to replace M25A1 mortars sent to Ukraine. Okay. This is a Patriot Batteries AN MPQ 65 radar. It covers plus or minus 120 degrees, which is okay if you have a Patriot belt to protect your forces. But Ukraine needs to cover 360 degrees around its cities, and surprise, the US delivered a whole bunch of extra AN MPQ 65 radars to Ukraine, tripling the number of radars per battery. Now the army is spending $130.4 million to buy AN MPQ-65A radars as replacements. This explains why all Russians' attacks on Kiev failed. Also, the US sent Ukraine an extra $53 million in AN MPQ-64 F1 Sentinel air defense radars for the NASAMS 2. That's the Norwegian National Air Surface-to-Air Missile System. That is a useful piece of kit that they are using in Ukraine, and they've been sent a number of those. So they have been sent an awful lot of these radars, which allows the Ukrainians to, I mean, even if they only have 120 degrees, if you've got enough of them, then you can obviously have 360 degrees. I wonder whether that also means that they'll be looking to put some of these near the front line. They're getting these 120 degree ones, which is interesting for Patriot, right? The Pentagon also buys 41.3 Hercules ARVs, 9.9 on Special Operations Riverine Craft, and 12.2 on Light Tactical All-Terrain Vehicles, LATVs, which were sent to Ukraine's Special Forces. 10 million for Striker mine rollers, 16.7 for fuel tankers, and then we have other things, so I won't list you the monies, but Hydra rocket pods, Hydra rockets, shoulder launch multi-purpose assault weapons, 84 launchers and ammo, Mark 13 sniper rifles, JLTVs are being acquired to replace the armoured Humvees sent to Ukraine. So this is where the US are backfilling Humvees being sent with newer vehicles that are due to replace the Humvees anyway. And last but not least, one more classified section. The US Navy has provided Ukraine with $80 million worth of RIM 7 Sea Sparrow missiles for Ukraine's Buk air defense missile. I've talked about this before. This is an anti-air missile sent from a ship, but it's been rejigged so it can be fired from an old Soviet Buk launcher, because they have a number of Buk launchers, but they've pretty much run out of missiles for them. So with a bit of rejigging, they've been able to use these Sea Sparrows, and actually lots of nations have Sea Sparrows. They got a whole bunch. I think, was it a German ship that was decommissioned? They're like, well, we've got all these missiles, don't need them. I think Canada might have had something to do with it. So they're getting these from a number of different places. The legendary Frankenstein is alive. I've seen it, and it works. In the next days, I will try to find time to work through the other 3 Pentagon realignment files with the weapons the Pentagon acquired in September. So stay tuned. Slava Ukraini. So that is just an idea of what America is buying, partly directly to go to Ukraine and partly to backfill its own stuff. And I think, you know, what he was particularly excited about with the number of these radars that are going over to support the Patriot systems. You know, they've got another 5 Patriot systems that they are buying the Ukrainians directly off Raytheon, and that will be of massive consequence to their air defense network. You would really hope that they could move a Patriot system nearer the front line, because if they can invalidate that airspace from being used by the Russians, that'd be super, super useful. And finally, we're going to go on to a Chris O'Wiki thread about the police. I have talked about this previously, I referenced it. Russia has become a police state without enough police due to a crisis in policing caused in part by the war in Ukraine. Poor salaries, lack of funding, political purges, and a focus on punishing political dissent are resulting in murders and rapes going unpunished. BBC News reports on the dismal situation of Russia's police forces, which face a massive drop in numbers. Although Russia has 900,000 police, so I've reported previously that Russia's internal security forces, and you can include police in this, outnumber their armed forces. When you're wondering whether Russian people will go up in, get up in arms and protest against Russia, if you understand that their internal security is stronger than their armed forces, then the chance of them successfully revolting, standing up against the Kremlin, is slim to none. 630 officers per 100,000 people, more than twice the figure for the US or UK. It's not enough. Officers blame a lack of funding, which has made it more profitable for them to leave and work as taxi drivers or couriers, and has meant that some have to use their own cars and buy their own equipment. The Ministry of the Interior has been unable to fill tens of thousands of vacancies. To make matters worse, the FSB has carried out a purge of officers believed to be supporters of the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny, including many experienced policemen. The war in Ukraine has led to a mass diversion of police effort away from serious crimes towards political offences. Officers say they are investigating endless charges against people discrediting the army. You can imagine this, with wearing colours that are deemed as Ukrainian colours, and reports left, right and centre about anything that smells like, Chris O'Wiki's done a massive thread on this, anything that smells like sentiment for Ukraine but often isn't. Police are called and have to deal with that. Well then, it's the old adage, haven't you got something better to do? Yeah, they almost certainly have. A former police mayor from Tomsk says, quote, everyone's got to check on some grandma who saw a curtain that looked like the Ukrainian flag. And the thread below lists, and I've gone through that thread, although it does get added to on a routine basis. As well as resulting in violent crimes not being investigated or solved, the crisis is leading to a surge in police violence and corruption as officers attempt to beat confessions out of suspects and carry out arbitrary arrests to meet quotas. The situation is also affecting Russia's ability to control the areas it occupies in Ukraine. The Interior Ministry says it needs an extra 40,000 officers just to police Donetsk and Luhansk, let alone Kherson and Zaporizhia. And this is absolutely insane, and detailed in the BBC article. Russia police crisis: burned out, disappointed, and demoralized. It's another example of how Russia is really struggling for across the board in so many different contexts that things are not looking good. However, they are still throwing men into trench lines to defend against the Ukrainian counteroffensive. That appears to be just, defining everything at the moment. They need people for that, and that means, people want to avoid mobilization, so they run away to a different country, and that leaves only a certain pool of people to cover mobilization for the armed forces still, and then covering for police forces that are losing personnel for all the aforementioned reasons. Just desperate situation in a desperate country, I guess. Anyway, there you go. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support, legendary people that you are. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pits.